Hello and welcome everyone. It's time for caring about the pesticides. We've been through this as a change for us. We're going to be watching the video at home and doing the practice in class. This video is going to be on the big idea of pesticides, what they do and why we need to be careful of our use of them in the environment because they can build up and cause us problems. For you to be successful today, you have to be able to tick off these points and be confident in your notes. To discuss the effects of continually introducing pesticides into the environment and accumulating there, and magnifying as it goes up food chains. We'll also look at some alternatives to pesticides. We'll be doing more about this in class, but in our video today we will be looking at this case study of a chemical called DDT. Now, more about that in class, but we will be making reference to it here so you know what we're talking about when we get to class. Okay, so to start, we go back to year 8, food chains and trophic levels. Starting with the producer, the arrow goes up because the insect is getting the energy from the plant. The mouse eats the insect and it gets the energy, so the arrow goes towards him. And the owl eats the mouse, so the arrow goes up to the owl because the owl's getting the energy. A quick rundown of the language. The plant produces its own energy from the sun, produces its own food from the sun, so it's a producer, and everyone else just consumes, so they are called consumers. The first level of consumer is called primary, just here, primary. And then naturally the next level up is secondary, and then the third level is the tertiary consumer. Main ideas to take away from this food chain, the whole topic in year 8 we spend on this, but it's pretty much energy flows up the food chain starting from the producer into the next level called the primary consumer, into the next level called the secondary consumer, and then the tertiary consumer gets to the next level of energy. There's also decomposers in there that break everything else down, but we're just going to focus on this. Trophic levels, the word up here, trophic levels, just means these levels here: producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. I feel like I've said that a lot in this slide, so let's just move on. The owl was at the top of that food chain, so how many mice do you need to feed an owl, and how many things do you need to feed all of those mice? If we put the numbers together, it looks like a pyramid. Here is a marine example. To feed one osprey, one bird of prey, you need 10 northern pike, and they're predator fish. To feed those pike, you need 100 perch. To feed those 100 perch, you need 1,000 bleak. To feed those fish, you need 10,000 freshwater shrimp. So the numbers in the food chain really decrease the further you start from the producers at the bottom, all the way up to the top level consumer. Okay, now we've got that year 8 recap out of the way, let's get some new definitions for pesticides. 1. Pesticide. It's a chemical specifically designed to kill insects, weeds, or disease. Synthetic. Synthetic just means man-made. And persistence, the amount of time that the pesticide remains effective in the environment, the amount of time it persists in the environment. These two things are linked together. Synthetic chemicals often don't degrade as well as natural chemicals, meaning that they are more persistent in the environment. Think about it like plastic bags, they stay around for a lot longer than biodegradable resources. Finally, bioaccumulation. Breaking it in half, accumulate means to build up inside something, and bio means living. It's the increase of a pesticide's concentration within a living organism in the food chain. How does that happen? Well, if you go and spray your strawberries, it's probably going to be absorbed via their leaves. Now, if those leaves get eaten, that pesticide gets passed up to the insect as well. It can be a big problem in humans, things that are stored in fatty tissue, because as soon as you start to lose weight, that fat is metabolized and that pesticide comes back out. You literally are what you eat, and if you are eating these chemicals as part of the food, you will be affected by the chemicals. But unfortunately, because we are at the top of the food chain, we are often affected a lot more than other trophic levels. This is called biomagnification, magnifying the concentration of the pesticide from one trophic level to another. Bear with me, this is my poor example, but say you have some background level in that 10,000 freshwater shrimp. Well, 1,000 bleak eat those shrimp and they get the increased dose because there's only 1,000 of them. And then 100 perch get that dose too, so that's being magnified up the food chain until, very unluckily, this one osprey at the top gets that same dose that's been concentrated by 10,000 freshwater shrimp right down to himself, because each layer of the trophic levels decrease in number. And unfortunately, that really concentrates the pesticide for anyone at the top of a food pyramid. Therefore, back to the word, biomagnification. Now, we've been watching, or we will watch, our documentary about DDT very soon, but DDT is one of the most widely vilified synthetic pesticides because it had this outrageous effect on non-target species, and because it stayed inside of organisms and then as they got eaten by other organisms, really magnified up the food chain. So the chemical structure is here, and its name is dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, so let's just shorten that to DDT. In the environment, DDT breaks down into a related chemical called DDE, and it appears to have properties that affect animals as if it were estrogen. I know we've been watching it, but I will give you a quick rundown here. DDT was widely used after World War II because it was very effective at killing insects. And that was great for the war effort and the home front as well. Unfortunately, it also caused the death of a whole lot of other organisms that weren't target species because it had these estrogen-like effects. So it went from being the savior of society to actually a big environmental problem. Some other notes for you: DDT has a half-life of 15 years. So no matter how much was sprayed 15 years ago, half of that is persisting in the environment, and unfortunately for us, it is fat soluble. So it will dissolve into the fat in organisms and it'll pretty much stay there. Now by itself it wouldn't have that much of an impact on us, but because of biomagnification, we're eating more of the lower trophic levels, we cop that increased dose, and that can have health consequences. Now we're going to continue going on about DDT in class, but for here we're focusing on the big picture of pesticides. That's just an example of a bad one. What are our alternatives here to stop using pesticides? Well, the big one is, honestly, just physical barriers. It's the simplest, and really it makes a lot of sense. Just have bird or insect netting over large crops, and that's protecting them. But other examples could be as simple as the slug barrier. It's a 10 centimeter wide strip of copper. Slugs and snails just can't get over them. It could be as easy as putting, upside down sticky tape over the bottom of your fruit trees, which stops pests from walking up and they get stuck to it and die. Physical barriers are the easiest alternative. One of the negatives, of course, is the cost, minus the cost, and 2, the manpower, which often requires specialised machinery or a system working with a staff. Another alternative is a biological control. Although I know we do have a bad history of using biological controls in Australia, there have been some successful cases too. An example is prickly pear. Prickly pear became a pest. The idea of a biological control is to introduce an animal that naturally preys on that pest organism. So they introduced it was a moth called Cactoblastus. It actually eats the leaves of the prickly pear, and it's been one of the best case studies of a successful biological control in Australia. Finally, the downside, obviously I don't need to mention the cane toads. When that biological control organism, if that's a predator itself, manages to get out of control, it can really screw up the ecosystem. So that's your downside, and we will be coming back to this when we do our option for introduced species in Australia. Alright, so what do you guys need to do next? Well, 1, go back to the plan for today and make sure you know where we're focusing on. We're discussing the effects of continually introducing new pesticides. We're looking at the effect on non-target species, defining the terms bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and then we're going to assess alternative management practices. So 1, go back. Make some quick notes for yourself, revising food chains and webs. Make those definitions focusing on bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and especially linking those into the food pyramid. Make sure that you write down some notes on the impact on non-target species, where you might need to draw on your knowledge from DDT from watching the documentary already. And finally, making up some notes to assess, which means you need to have a discussion and then make a judgment. So you're assessing some of those alternatives we talked about, such as the physical barriers and the biological controls. That's it. And when you're looking over your notes that you've written, come back to this and make sure that you are happy you can do these parts here, and that you're familiar. We're going to be linking this in with the dot point over here. A secondary source, so the movie, to identify DDT, whose use is now banned, summarising its use, the reasons for stopping its use, available evidence to assess the impacts residually on the environment. Good job, team. Thanks for your hard work. This was a long one.